Welcome to a deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, a truly fascinating collection of fragments, observations, and musings from the notebooks and writings of Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
That's right. It's less like reading finished essays and more like opening a window directly into a brilliant, sometimes turbulent, but always intensely curious mind caught in the act of thinking.
Yeah, like mid-thought almost.
Exactly. We have everything from fleeting sensory details to profound philosophical questions, personal struggles, and some really sharp social commentary, too.
The source material is incredibly varied. One moment you're reading a vivid description of, say, moonlight. The next he's wrestling with abstract ideas about time or evil. Our mission in this deep dive is really to sort through this rich, fragmented source and extract the most powerful nuggets of knowledge and insight, helping you understand what really stands out and why these centuries-old jottings can still resonate today.
Think of it as uncovering hidden gems in a vast, sometimes chaotic, intellectual treasure chest. We'll explore the surprising connections he makes and the deeply personal nature of his inquiries, seeing how, the smallest observation can spark the biggest question.
Okay, let's jump in then. One of the first things you notice is his incredible attunement to the natural world. But it's never just passive description, is it?
No, never. He sees the world through this lens of deeper meaning.
Right.
Take his note on the kingfisher in winter. The cold slows its flight, allowing him to actually see its colors more clearly, which makes him think of it almost like a flying flower.
A flying flower.
Yeah.
That's lovely. It's that intense observation leading straight into metaphor.
Precisely. And the little daisy blooming during a late spring in March, he looks at it and wonders, quid si vivat? What if it lives? What if it survives this cold snap?
And his reaction is immediate, isn't it?
Yeah. He writes down, never pluck a flower again. It's a direct, emotional, even moral response to just looking at a daisy.
These aren't isolated incidents either.
Not at all. He captures the sounds of nightingales and blossom trees, a bat wheeling in the air, and then, strikingly, the noise of frogs, which he describes like living catacombs.
Wow. Living catacombs. That contrast between vibrant life and something echoing death is really arresting.
It is. He's also capturing these ephemeral visual things, the slanting pillars of misty light shafts moving under the sun, or the leaves on trees upturned by the wind just at twilight. Momentary things, but he gives them weight.
Yeah, he notices them.
And he follows that thread into things that are almost invisible. He sees thistle and dandelion seeds flying around lonely mountains, skimming the lake like swallows.
And he connects this to Wordsworth, right?
Exactly. To a line from Wordsworth about the dandelion seed making report of an invisible breeze. It's about seeing the evidence of unseen forces. It's not just the seed, it's the wind you can't see.
He contrasts this vibrant, interconnected natural world with the town, the immovableness of the town.
Where people seem isolated even in motion, compared to the universal motion and harmonious system he perceives everywhere in the country.
He describes London in the dim light, looking like a huge place of sepulchres where spirits glide through. It's quite a haunting image of urban alienation.
It really is. And this focus on perception leads him to fascinating thoughts about the senses themselves. He notes, for example, the odd feeling of a numb limb seeming twice its actual size.
Relating that specifically to touch being distorted.
Right. And here's where it gets, really interesting and personal. He talks about the horror of sounds without the sense of outness.
Outness, yeah. That's his term for the feeling that a sensation is coming from outside you in the external world.
Exactly. He describes driving over pavement as exquisite torture because the sound seems to be happening inside his head, lacking that external spatial context.
It really highlights how much our sanity relies on our senses presenting a consistent external reality, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and that internal world is something he constantly explores. He observes that real pain can sometimes cure imaginary ills.
Like physical suffering grounds you somehow.
Perhaps. It grounds you and maybe dispels anxieties that aren't rooted in immediate reality. He even provocatively states that pain and woe are the parents of pleasure and happiness.
Suggesting a necessary relationship between suffering and the capacity for joy. That's quite a thought.
It is. And he identifies what he calls the thinking disease.
The thinking disease.
Now, tell me more. This is where common thoughts and feelings become intensely interesting because you apply excessive intellectual energy to analyzing them. You turn feelings into objects of obsessive thought, which he feels is corrosive to the body and soul.
That feels incredibly prescient, doesn't it? The idea of overthinking your own emotions to your detriment.
Very much so. And he captures the deep, fundamental human need to be truly understood, even for someone ostracized like a criminal.
That comfort of being understood.
Yes, he notes the unspeakable comfort that comes from someone understanding you. But then he contrasts it with the inevitable disappointment he feels in human friendship on Earth, because he believes no one can fully understand another person.
Which links back to his interest in perception and subjective experience.
Right. He recounts his son Hartley's experience of the seams.
The seams.
Yeah, things that appear to be there but are not, like visual distortions or fleeting illusions. He notes how the physical presence of a candle can dispel these seams, illustrating the power of external reality to correct internal perceptions.
Fascinating. He also dives deep into dreams, seeing them as windows into the mind's workings.
He does. He attempts to explain the origin of moral evil, suggesting it might stem from the streamy nature of association, the mind's tendency for unchecked, drifting thoughts, which deliberate thinking is supposed to curb.
So like passive thinking gone wrong.
Sort of. He even posits that delirium is like the height, the ideal form of this mere association, wondering how physical pain influences it. It's quite speculative, of course.
And he records specific unsettling dreams too.
Oh, yes. The sense of struggle and fear infusing his sleep. A nightmare featuring an abstract touch, grasp, or weight of hate and horror, detached from any recognizable form. Really chilling stuff.
And that one about the child.
Yes, a frightening dream about a child with sneering and fiendish malignity, connecting it to a Latin motto about genius, often linked to his poem, The Ancient Mariner.
Dreams could even be directly triggered by real anxieties, couldn't they?
Definitely. He recounts a dream about losing all his writings, which he strongly suspected had been lost when the Arrow frigate was captured by the French. It shows how the subconscious processes and dramatizes our waking feels.
Moving to the concept of the self, the I, how does he approach that?
He suggests that through deep feeling, our ideas become dim, and this dim feeling is what constitutes our sense of life, our sense of I, where the percipient and a perceived sort of merge.
Contrasting that with thinking about an external object.
Exactly, where the idea and the thinking I remain distinct. He uses another anecdote about young Hartley to illustrate this.
The one with the mirror.
That's the one. Hartley struggled to explain the difference between looking at a prospect outside and seeing its image in a mirror held overhead. Coleridge saw this difficulty as an abstract representation of thinking as a pure act or energy, distinct from the specific thought content. It's subtle, but deep.
Shifting gears a bit, from the self to the broader mechanisms of thought and language, he observes how children naturally create words.
Yes, instinctively creating new words based on analogy. He sees it revealing a fundamental principle of language formation, like it's built in.
He also offers some sharp critiques of writing styles.
He does. Hot-headed men, he says, confuse. Cool-headed men jumble. But warm feelings, combined with clear thought, produce order and true connection. He dislikes writers who constantly interrupt their flow with phrases like, "let us now return to," feels artificial to him.
And he wasn't keen on excessive quotations either.
Not at all. He ridicules it, seeing it as a form of intellectual laziness. He also notes, interestingly, that the ludicrous often weakens memory if something is too funny. You remember the laugh, but forget the point.
Huh. That's probably true. He makes a fascinating distinction between originality and what he calls positive thought.
Yes, suggesting that having images that are too clear or too full in your mind can actually prevent originality. Originality requires a certain amount of ambiguity, a space for creation.
Which seems counterintuitive at first.
It does, and he draws a crucial philosophical line between a specific instance of something, a thought, a work, and the abstract concept itself, thought, work. These, for him, are fundamentally different categories of being or understanding.
This brings us to a core challenge of communication, which he articulates with great clarity: the impossibility of conveying knowledge perfectly through words alone.
Right, his principle is that the clarity with which knowledge can be conveyed by words is directly proportional to the hearer's existing stores and faculties of observation, both internal and external.
So it depends on what the listener already brings to the table.
Exactly. Like explaining the color yellow to someone who's never seen it, the words are pretty useless without the shared experience. You need that common ground.
He has a witty take on puns and verbal conceits too.
Calls them cat's cradles. Intricate and perhaps momentarily amusing, but ultimately just playing with strings, lacking real substance.
When it comes to poetry specifically, he had thoughts on revision.
He felt that correcting poetry too much, like over-disciplining schoolboys, could stifle its spirit, let it breathe a bit.
And he made a powerful point about artificial feelings in poetry.
A really important one. Poetry that excites artificial feelings, emotions not genuinely earned or felt, can actually make us callous to real feelings. It's a warning against empty sentimentalism.
He also jotted down ideas for potential writing projects, didn't he?
Yeah, charming little notes like a memoir about a good soul observing the slow, subtle unfolding of young love, the adolescence of love, he called it.
Sweet.
Aye.
But he also had critiques for poets and critics.
Oh, yes. He critiques poets who try to be literary critics, seeing them as conflicted, neither bond nor free, and he targets pseudo-poets whose main goal isn't truth or beauty, but merely chasing popular praise.
And he made a plea for poetic license.
A passionate one, defending the right of poets to use strong, even harsh language when necessary for emotional truth, referencing the Roman poet Catullus as an example. Sometimes you need those rough edges.
And then there's that wonderfully eccentric thought about the afterlife.
Yes, in the next world, the souls of dull, good men might serve as bodies for the souls of Shakespeare's and Milton's. A very unique vision of the spiritual hierarchy. You wonder where that came from.
Who knows? Moving from the creative mind to human connections and society, he captures specific, resonant moments of interaction.
He really does. He describes the interesting feeling of affectionate reception from a complete stranger who happens to be the dear friend of one of your dear friends, that instant bond formed through a shared connection.
He uses vivid, sometimes quite cutting, analogies for people too.
Definitely. He compares the poet Southey to an ostrich cannot fly, perhaps meaning reach great poetic heights, but has other notable qualities. Others he calls snails of intellect who only perceive things slowly through touch, lacking broader vision. A bit harsh.
Yeah, just a bit. He muses on social habits too, like why city dwellers might favor food and country folk drink.
Right, perhaps one from the rarity of luxury, the other from the uniformity of daily life. Just throwing ideas out there. He also notes that sympathy can feel like an inward reverberation if feelings aren't disclosed externally, that hidden resonance.
And a poignant observation about human nature. A kind-hearted man who is forced to give a painful refusal might do it roughly or fiercely.
Possibly to make it quicker, or maybe to manage his own discomfort at causing pain. It's a complex psychological insight.
This connects to the pain of finding faults in dear friends. He says he finds no comfort in the idea of a person being merely average.
No, because his wish, he says, is to love more deeply than he expects to be loved. He aims high in friendship.
He also notes that the shattering of long and deep-rooted associations when you realize something or someone you thought you knew isn't what you believed always leaves the mind in an angry state.
Yeah, even if your own understanding led to the change, it's that disruption. Curiously, he also observes that absence can sometimes foster new friendships by allowing space for connection.
He circles back to his idea of the thinking disease, applying it to relationships as morbid sentiment.
Right, where feelings become the objects you analyze rather than the guides for how you relate to others, over-intellectualizing relationships.
Looking at society more broadly, he critiques judging others based on dislike, or focusing on one single fault instead of the whole person.
He saw this particularly among some literary figures, he notes, and he warns against applying abstract algebraic terms like X, Y, Z to nations and morals.
Why did he dislike that?
He felt this approach, which reduces complex realities to cold symbols, kills public spirit, and deadens national effort. You lose the human element.
He identifies sort of Jacobinism and the anti-Jacobins of his day.
Yeah, it's a sharp point. Those who opposed revolutionary ideas but themselves displayed contempt for inherited institutions and their ancestors, echoing the very disregard for tradition they criticized. Hypocrisy, basically.
He critiques the rage for monition, the eagerness to give blunt, unsolicited advice.
Seeing it often as a form of self-flattery, he contrasts this with what he experienced as Wordsworth's gentle, beneficial influence, a much better model.
He delivers a famous critique of a Shakespeare scholar. Stevens, was it?
Yes, George Stevens. Coleridge critiques his approach for focusing obsessively on trivial details, calling him an eternal bricker-up of Shakespeare, someone who obstructs access to the real genius by burying it in useless minutiae. Build walls instead of opening doors.
He makes a general observation about women.
Yes, drawing on personal experience, he notes that women can be infinitely fonder of clinging to and defending things. It's a generalization, of course, reflecting his time and perspective.
He dissects the mentality of a party man who sounds like he hates his country,
but is really just expressing hatred for the opposing political party. He calls the True monster, someone who abuses their own country while abroad. That feels quite relevant still.
He expresses concern about the profanation of the word the people.
Arguing that only those who can govern themselves are truly entitled to govern others. Freedom, for him, rests on understanding and revering its associated duties. It's not just a free-for-all.
He levels particularly strong critiques at certain influential philosophers of his time, Paley, Priestley, Locke.
And the Erastians, yes. He argues that their ethical systems, which he saw as, well, vile, cowardly, and selfishly based on external consequences or utility, negatively influence people's actions even when they felt more noble inclinations internally. He thought their ideas were undermining true morality.
He analyzes what he calls self-advertising philanthropy.
Using the example of the abolitionist movement, tracing a kind of decline from initial genuine virtue to a mix of vanity and power-seeking, eventually devolving into some figures merely using the cause for political gain or reputation. He's suspicious of virtue that needs a public spotlight.
He offers some satirical descriptions of types of people too, modern reviewers.
Like jurymen, passing superficial judgment without deep engagement, a practical man is described like a pig. Solid, never moving without a clear external motive, often with a scheming squint. Ouch.
Double ouch. And he skewers the perceived role of certain intellectuals from Edinburgh.
Comparing them satirically to Saint Cecilia, the patron saint of music, but imagining his Saint Cecilia dislikes all musical instruments except the Jew's harp, implying their taste is narrow and exclusive. Very pointed satire.
He reflects on the difficult position of men of genius in society.
Yeah, they're expected to perform on demand, but then complained about as lecturing if, when asked a question, they attempt to provide deep principles rather than just a shallow answer. Kind of a no-win situation.
Transitioning now to his more abstract and spiritual reflections, he actually states the aim of his metaphysics quite clearly.
Yes, he says his goal is not to confuse or extinguish intellectual light, but rather to expose folly, support venerable truths, make reason shed light on feelings, and allow feelings to diffuse warmth through reason. It's a beautiful vision of integrating head and heart.
Seeking balance.
Exactly. He finds immense comfort in the omnipresence of God, the idea that thou knowest everything. This is never unintelligible to him.
And he contrasts that sharply
with the common representation of God as merely a spy, like Jeremy Bentham's panopticon prison design, a cold, distant observer. His God is intimate, all-knowing in a comforting way.
He sees religion fundamentally resting on the ancient philosophical question of the one and the good.
Referencing the Neoplatonist Proclus, yes, going back to those core questions.
And he grapples with what he calls the universal mystery, drawing on Spinoza. Oh, the one can be many.
It seems a contradiction in terms, he says, yet it's a reality present everywhere in existence. How can unity contain multiplicity? That's a central puzzle for him.
His thoughts on time and eternity are complex, too.
Very. He sees the complexity of life as a ravel produced by time struggling with eternity, and he notes how our subjective sense of time changes. In troubled manhood, the sun seems to stand still even though it's moving. In joyous youth, the moon seems to race across the sky even when it's relatively still.
Our inner state affects our perception of time's flow. And God.
God, he states, exists not in time at all, completely outside it.
On the nature of love, he writes that the truly beloved object becomes a symbol of God for the lover.
And the lover, in this spiritual sense, worships the transformation produced within his own soul by the influence of the beloved. It's about internal change prompted by love.
He defines happiness in this life
as the state where duty and pleasure coincide. He sees duty as a symbol of pleasure in this life, suggesting that in a future state, pleasure itself will become the symbol of duty. A subtle distinction between human and, say, angelic happiness.
He wrestles with the profound question of evil. Where does he land on that?
Well, he tentatively suggests its origin might lie in that streamy association, unchecked mental drifting, calling it a doubtful experiment in his notes. He sees vice as imperfect, existing volition.
And he sees Christianity as unique in this.
Yes. Crucially, he believes Christianity uniquely asserts the positive being of evil and sin, and from that premise derives the freedom of the creature. It's not just an absence of good, but a real force.
He posits two forms of revelation, material and moral.
Arguing the material world can only be truly understood or seen through the lens of the moral, referencing St. Paul. It's like trying to learn a language just from a book versus understanding it through lived experience and connection.
He's critical of purely historical religion, then.
Yes, forms of religion based purely on historical tradition without that inner understanding or moral lens. He contrasts genuine spiritual religion with what he calls the superstition of spirits, comparing those who focus on external spiritual phenomena to deaf and dumb idiots unable to truly hear or articulate the deeper truth.
He tackles the philosophical debate of idealism versus superstition through the example of seeing apparitions.
Right. Is seeing an image purely within the brain a philosophical idea? Or is it superstition to believe that image points to something external? He references Hamlet seeing a phantom with his mind's eye, which, with higher intensity, becomes his father's ghost, blurring that line between internal perception and external reality. Where does the mind end and the world begin?
He describes God as the unknown cause.
To which the theist directs feelings of love and awe, linking conscience directly to actions. Goodness and wisdom, in this view, are reflections of the effect of this unknown cause, like naming the cause of cold or heat. We know the effects, not the ultimate cause itself.
He quotes St. Augustine to emphasize the primacy of faith.
Fides enim debet praecedere intellectum. Faith must precede understanding, so that understanding can be the reward of faith. Start with belief.
He makes a foundational distinction between science and philosophy.
Saying the first man of science sought knowledge for gratification, just to know things, the first philosopher sought knowledge in order to understand existence itself. Different motivations.
And he uses that beautiful analogy.
Comparing knowledge and being to the Rhone and Adar rivers passing through Lake Geneva, they flow through the same space but remain distinct streams. Knowledge and being meet in man, and the philosophical quest is like sailing back towards the source, the I am I N.
He notes that metaphysics struggled and needed specific technical terms.
Like ivitates and itates, terms he sometimes coined or used. He felt it suffered when forced into popular language, eventually being supplanted by empirical psychology, which, for him, missed the deeper questions.
And for a powerful image of the resurrection.
Almost violent, isn't it? He compares it to a magazine of gunpowder struck by lightning, or the entire ocean falling into a vast mass of fire, using the Latin phrase potentia fit actus, potential becomes act. A sudden, total transformation.
Throughout all these disparate thoughts, his mind constantly employs analogies. It's clearly a key way he connects the seemingly unconnected fragments.
Absolutely. It's his bridge-building tool. He uses analogies to make sense of everything, from people, Southey, the ostrich, the snails of intellect, to places London as sepulchres, to abstract states of mind.
Like the feeling of repose after agitation being like a pool under a waterfall.
Or a treacherous knave drawing out secrets compared to Egyptian enchanters drawing serpents. Very visual.
Or describing Hazlitt, the writer.
As having anger that glows like phosphorus, but love that burns with the intensity of Nebuchadnezzar's furnace. Such extreme comparisons.
He finds great value in aphorisms and adages, too.
Phrases of universal application like extremes meet, treat everything according to its nature, and the ultimate imperative, be. He sees these simple phrases as fragments of truth that can help reconcile complex, even hostile, opposing ideas. They hold wisdom. And he notes that particular satisfaction when knowledge gained from books lines up perfectly with actual experience of the world, that click of recognition.
Yeah, that aha moment. Finally, let's touch on some of his more direct personal reflections, which offer glimpses into his own struggles and character.
He notes his discomfort with things contingent and transitory, the specific fleeting facts of history or local detail. He relates wishing away a guide, telling him historical facts at Carnarvon Castle, preferring to engage with the timeless structure itself. He wanted the essence, not the trivia.
He recounts small, curious personal accidents.
Like finding a lost stick of sealing wax stuck to his elbow, or the strange impulse late at night to complete a piece of molded architecture with 3 pieces of wood, seeing it as a disease of totalizing, of perfecting, an urge to make things whole. Very revealing of his mindset.
He confesses a surprising lack of understanding about simple mechanisms.
Like how the very pen he used daily actually worked. And he reflects deeply, somewhat melancholically, on his own genius, feeling his strength. The ability to produce work was small compared to his power, the potential for thought.
The oak versus the tropic annual analogy.
Exactly. Oak being slow, steady strength, the tropic annual having rapid, immense power but quickly spent. He felt like a ghost among more productive contemporaries like Sharp or Mackintosh.
He captures the difficult position of a conscientious author in what he saw as a corrupt age.
Forced to expose himself to public criticism and the charges of envy or vanity simply by trying to speak truth, a painful spot to be in.
He returns to the contrast between the subjective sense of time in troubled adulthood versus joyous youth.
How time feels different depending on our inner state. that subjective experience again,
He writes about the lasting pain of disappointed love or betrayed fidelity.
describing it as a scar that duty itself keeps alive, a constant reminder of a wound, even if the deepest feelings are now directed elsewhere. Quite bleak, really.
He offers surprisingly practical advice for writers, though.
Yeah, keep separate notebooks for notes on different authors and practice the discipline of sincerely recording your impressions over time, seeing it as practice for the mental agility needed in debate and conversation. Good advice.
He advocates strongly for soul love over a purely rational or enlightened self-love.
Finding more profound wisdom in the simple traditional admonition, take pity of your poor soul. A call for deeper self-compassion, perhaps.
And he ends with a beautiful, poignant image about life's fleeting joys.
Describing how hope and recollection piece together our short summer, like the sun briefly visible before and after rising or setting in the long, strange light of the polar spring or autumn, making the most of fragments of light.
Wow. We've really only had time to scratch the surface of the insights packed into these incredible notes.
Absolutely. What comes through so strongly is a mind in constant, restless engagement with the world, external nature, the inner self, human society, and the deepest philosophical and spiritual questions.
He was always seeking connections, wasn't he? Trying to understand not just what things are, but why they matter and how they connect to the larger tapestry of existence and the human soul.
From the physics of perception to the metaphysics of unity, from the dynamics of friendship to the critique of political rhetoric, it's a journey across a vast intellectual landscape, all filtered through the lens of one deeply personal, sometimes troubled consciousness.
And perhaps the most powerful takeaway is how intimately he links outward observation, inner feeling, and abstract thought.
Definitely. The way the flight of a kingfisher can spark a thought about beauty and fragility, or how intense pain can become the parent of happiness, these show that for Coleridge, intellect and emotion, the external and internal, were inseparable. They fed each other constantly.
Absolutely. This deep dive reveals the profound value of paying close attention, both to the subtle details of the world around us and to the complex landscape of our own minds and feelings.
So, for you listening, perhaps the key thought to carry forward is this. How might your own seemingly random observations, fleeting feelings, or abstract questions connect to form a deeper understanding of your own life and the world?
What might you discover if you paid closer, more integrated attention to the fragments of knowledge and wisdom that fall from your own daily experience?
Something definitely worth pondering. We hope you found this deep dive insightful.